repository that's going to allow us to create, read, update, and delete modules from the database. So to use this, I guess we could do like a main and do the console instead. Let's use a technique that we explored last time we met. We're going to expose this as a RESTful service on the so that we can hit it with a browser, right? So let's do that. So in here somewhere, okay, we wrote a controller for the course. Really, all controllers should be under a directory called controllers. So let's create a package called controllers, and in there, let's create a Java class, and we'll call it module controller, right? And in here, we would like to have things that we would like to retrieve, things such as, find a public, a list. I want to return all the modules. For instance, let's start with modules and find all modules. How's that? Find all modules, right? And presumably this is going, we want to return all the modules that are stored in the database. I don't believe we have any, so we'll need to insert a couple of things in there. But how do we use it? So what I'd like to be able to do here is use our brand new repository, which we just wrote, right? So the way we're going to insert in here is we would want an instance for that, right? So we have the module repository. We would like to an instance. So instead of instantiating an instance here, right? This instance is going to be using, presumably it's going to be using connection pools. It's gonna have to go fetch connections from this pool. It's going to handle all this, and presumably, hopefully, all these connections have already been instantiated. When the server boots up and it's already set and gone, right? So ideally, this is the life cycle of this repository. It's a fairly complex life cycle, right? That it needs to grab the connections and all that. So instead of me handling the life cycle of this object, I'm going to delegate it. I'm going to delegate it to the server. The server is going to handle the life cycle, right? It's going to be responsible for instantiating this repository for me, hooking it up to the right connection in the database, right? And giving me an instance so I can start using it, right? So that, for instance, one of the things that I could do, for instance, if I say repository, notice all the functions that are here are available for me here, okay? These are all implemented by the CRUD repository that we are extending. So we are inheriting all these functions, which we are not implementing, right? They're implemented by the one that we're extending, yes? So we have, notice, we have find all, see that? Find all. We have a find all by ID. We have a delete all, meaning just remove everything, truncate the entire table, or delete a single record if you give them the primary key. Right. So a lot of the functions that we might want to use to implement are here. Notice we have save, as I mentioned earlier. Save can be used for both inserts and updates. Right. So let's start using a couple of these. So let's use find all. One of the challenges of using find all and using some of these generic implementations is, notice what it gives me. It gives me iterable. See that? And actually that makes sense that it's iterable. It makes sense as iterable because the way we logically might think about this find all is that, well, I'm going to go fetch all these records and I can just iterate over them, right? Maybe I could put them inside of a for loop. Notice that it makes no sense to put it inside of a for loop because a for loop would assume that the array is fully loaded into memory, right? And that it has references to all the instances of objects that are randomly accessible in your memory, which makes no sense, right? Because this could be thousands and thousands of records. It would be silly to assume that the database, the server would load thousands and thousands of records in memory. We need to copy all these records in memory, instantiate them, and then give you a reference to this memory, right? So instead, it gives us iterable, which makes sense, right? It allows it to delegate the mechanism of how we are iterating over it, delegate it to the underlying framework, right? To go one at a time, and then when we run out of the records, maybe fetch a couple more, and then we can go and iterate some more. Make sense, right? But I'm going to skip that part. What I'm going to try and do here is that I am actually going to return all this. Right now, it's complaining, saying that you actually want a list module, but it's returning an iterable. That's fine. We can I think we can convert it, splitter, or we can cast it. Yeah, let's cast it. Now this is forcing the infrastructure to actually fetch all the records into memory and copy them over, right? Because I need them all, because I need to return them. I can't return a pointer to some of this, right? Especially through the web, right? Through the web, I'm going to get an entire array of all the records. That actually makes silly. It would be silly to try and send all thousands of records as a huge JSON array. More commonly, your URL might ask, give me the first 10, right? And then give me the next 10, and then give me the next 10, and you would consume them progressively, yes? And maybe as a user interface, you might implement kind of like a paginator, right? Where you can show me the first page, the second page, the third page, right? And then you progressively are consuming the content as you go forward, right? But here we're doing it brute force. Give me all the records, right? So let's give me all the records. Excellent. All right, so we want to expose this so that we can hit it from a server. So to do that, we used a REST controller, and then we map this to some URL. So get mapping, and we'll call it maybe I don't know, modules. Okay, so modules. Presumably that's going to return to me all the modules. Right? If I go to my URL in my browser. So let's see if we can restart this. What did it say? Okay. All right. So it's running, and so let's try it out. So let's go to localhost. I think it's 8080/modules. All right. So notice that it comes back with an empty array, which makes sense, right? We never inserted any modules into my database. So let's insert a couple things in there and retest it. We can say modules, and we can say insert. We can create a new SQL, and we can say send to SQL editor, insert. Actually, no, let's not do that. Select. So there it is. There's no modules, obviously. So let's start and create a couple here. So we'll say this is a SQL, and we had GPA, and we covered JDBC, right? And we covered UML. So these are all different modules. So let's apply, and it generates all these inserts for us, and they're there. Now if we go back and we hit this again, notice that indeed we have the data that has been inserted into the database, right? And notice the IDs, right, have been generated dynamically. Now notice that it started from 1. Different vendors are free to start from different places. By default, MySQL starts from 1 and then increments by 1. But if you use different vendors, it might start like from 10, right, and then skip every 10, 10, 20, 30. Different vendors will do different things. You can configure that as well. But it's easier to let the database deal with it. Some best practices suggest that it's not a good idea to let the database have and generate these IDs for you. That instead you should be implementing these IDs and generating them from some algorithm that you have control over, some unique identifier that that is safe, right? That you can determine that you generated that ID, right? That you can always it's safer, right? If you control that. But for our purposes, we're going to delegate that job to the database. Yes. Before I forget, if I rerun this, it's going to blow away my modules or table. Okay, so before I forget, I'm going to go into my applications properties direct file. I'm going to change this auto DDL. I'm going to change this to update. Meaning, if the table is already there, don't blow it away. Right? Only do incremental updates. Maybe a field name change or data type change or something like that, right? But don't blow it away, right? Otherwise, every time I restart the server, it dumps all my data, and I would have to restart from there. Everybody good?